I come from a small mining town in Arizona, where there is not a lot to do except hike. It was a good but boring area to grow up. Our population was small, with little to no crime. My father owned the quarry, where a majority of the community's economic strength came from. He left me a sizable inheritance after he passed away. I bought a truck and a house out in the plains with a basketball court and a pool. That was the sole extent of my lavish spending, but it was all I needed. Until you count pizza. I didn't have many vices to blow my fortune on. I've never been an avid party goer, luckily. Like a lot of people my age, one indulgence I did have was watching YouTube. Urban exploration became my most searched category of mine of 2009. I became a subscriber of a content creator and urbex vlogger named Isolation Infinity. He kept himself anonymous and did not show his face. He used footage of the haunts he went into as captured by the body camera strapped to his chest. His voice's baritone became a signature element of the channel. He travelled all over the world and went into many chilling places. These included vacant hospitals, asylums, morgues, and train stations. He even stumbled upon a murder in progress once. A homeless man had stomped another transient to death in a farmhouse. He uploaded edited parts of it. This was a controversial decision. It almost resulted in a lifetime ban for him from the platform. The clips did help law enforcement later on nonetheless. He was also arrested a few times for trespassing on famous estates. The Houdini mansion in Los Angeles was one of them, but none of his fans held this against him. We respected him for being willing to get into trouble with the law in the pursuit of the next viral video. Late last year, Isolation Infinity announced he was going to have a live face reveal. It was only going to be for his patrons, i.e. those who gave money to his Patreon account. I contributed funds to him on a monthly basis. I viewed him as a pioneer of his entertainment niche and did not mind sparing a little change. He emailed me and told me I was one of the dozen allowed to attend the live event. He further stated it would be a password-protected chat room. He also promised an exclusive video, which would not make it onto the public video lineup. I was more interested in the latter than the former. I never cared what his appearance was, since I already had a vision of someone my age, in their mid to late 20s. It was hard to convince me he looked any different from the picture in my mind's eye. Still, I was not going to turn down the chance to find out. Being able to brag to his die-hard followers, who did not get to experience it, would be worth it alone. The night of the scheduled face reveal, I booted up my PC. I kicked back on a lounge chair in the second-story room of my house, which was my entertainment space. It was complete with video game consoles and my beloved Alienware computer. An open bag of peppered jerky and a bottle of ginger ale sat next to my keyboard. I went into my email. The password was in my inbox. I followed the link. It led me to the video of a room with nothing in it but a red wall and a baby blue frame. The caption, Isolation Infinity will be on shortly, rested at the bottom of the screen. I expected a home studio, instead got what appeared to be someone's dingy basement in need of a new coat of paint. What bothered me most was the sound of the heavy machinery whirring in the background. I wrote it off as bad plumbing. A man came into the frame. He was slim and wore a trench coat with maroon buttons on its front. He reached out and grabbed the lens of the camera and shifted it upwards. The familiar voice we'd all grown fond of started to count down. "Are you ready to see who I am?" Isolation Infinity asked. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 5, he hoisted it upwards and pointed it at his face. I froze. He looked nothing like what I had visualized. He was hairless, emaciated, pale, and had marble black eyes. He reminded me of Werner Krauss from the old German 1920 film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. His mouth hung open and tilted to the side as if he could not control the movement of his jaw. The most alarming thing to me was not how his features were not flattering. That explained why he valued being off camera for most of his career. What upset me the most in the beginning was how the disparity in his perceived age made me feel lied to. He always told his fans he was a young man, like most of his demographic. The individual before me on the screen was in his 50s at the earliest. "I've been fantasizing about broadcasting this for a long time," he said as he licked his lips. "You have made this possible, and I need to show my appreciation for giving thanks in the most sincere way I know how." He moved the camera to the left, and I could not believe what I saw. A woman in her 30s sat on a grimy floor, her head down from evident exhaustion. Rusted chains circled her arms. She wore a tattered black top as though someone's knife or nails had left wounds on portions of her torso. Stains were on her clothes. She'd spent time in the dirt fighting someone or clawing her way out of a soiled embankment before this. "Say something," he ordered her. "Tell them you can't wait to die." The blades of a chainsaw came into view, and its motor revved. She whimpered with pain and she tried to murmur something. I saw blood drip from her mouth. I dragged the mouse cursor over the right-hand side of the screen to see how many people were in the chat. The answer I received left me weak. No one else was there but me. The others had either left or were never there to begin with, and I was too stupid to notice until then. My heartbeat increased as I tried to close the window out. I could not. The X symbol on the right-hand side was visible but useless. It was like every virus-infected pop-up ad you could not escape from. "What?" Infinity Isolation asked. "You don't like it, Mark? Everything I do is to make my most devoted subscribers happy." A chill ran through me. He knew my name. It took me a second to realize he'd gotten it through my membership to his Patreon. The fact that he was aware of how I was his only viewer worried me. Was I going to be the sole witness to the barbaric act of murder? "Calm down," I reassured myself. "This is an elaborate prank. He's recording right now. He's wearing scary Hollywood makeup and she's an actress. This is all for the sake of getting more views. The chainsaw has to be prop bought off Etsy.com or something." Still, my hand inched towards the phone to call 911. The way the woman expressed her misery in the moment was all too convincing. I held my device close to my ear. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mark." He stared right at the screen for a moment, his eyes making perfect contact with mine. Can he see me? He lifted the chainsaw above the woman's head. He brought it down with a noise from his throat which sounded like a cross between a scream and a laugh. A fountain of gore spurted out. The lens got hit with crimson bubbles. He cackled as I unplugged my computer. I carried it downstairs to my car and drove to the nearest police station. I filled out an incident report in an office with a dying lamp and a scowl of a detective facing me. He looked as though he would have rather been anywhere else but at work. For the first 2 hours there, I had to convince them that I was not a crazy person. They thought I was there to waste their time with the fanciful tale of my correspondence with some creep. "I hope it was all a hoax," I said. "If this is not real, no one would be happier about it than me. Here's my computer. See if you can trace where he's at in case it..." I gagged before I could complete my thought. The idea of it being authentic was overwhelming. They had cybercrimes go over everything, and a few days later I got my PC back. It took about a week before I received a call from someone working the case. She was a homicide investigator named Samantha Brown. "We found the killer. It was streaming from a bunker in Virginia," she said. "It's an old fallout shelter abandoned since the Cold War. He calls himself I-73 Butcher, since that highway is his preferred route. He uses it as a screen name on the dark web." "Infinity Isolation is a serial killer?" I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. "No," she said. "The real Isolation Infinity is someone else. The maniac poses as famous people. He uses a combination of tools, including voice-altering software and encrypted Wi-Fi. He hacks into their accounts. He gets a thrill out of making complete strangers watch his acts of terror. His tech-savvy way also allows him to control other people's webcams, and we don't know how many he has breached. He's on several most wanted lists of agencies. We've never found out what he looks like. The faces he uses on those terrible live streams are prosthetic. He's maintained stringent anonymity and avoided the news cycle. I'm sorry you saw such torment. The good part is, you turning in your computer helped us at least find out his last known whereabouts. The scene's searched and we have some evidence. He's still out there somewhere? For now. I went to bed that night with a host of emotions. I felt violated by a complete monster that sabotaged my privacy. Moreover, I felt dumb for getting swindled. I still feel shivers over the fact that he's not apprehended. Word of what happened got to the real Isolation Infinity, who has of late deleted his entire channel. Many speculated on how victims mistaking him for an insane person perturbed him. Sometimes, as I lay my head down and drift off to sleep, I hear a noise by my window. I jump up and think it's a chainsaw. Thus far, it has been a neighbour's lawnmower every time. I hope it stays that way. I'm a man in my late 20s. I was born and lived in London for most of my life. I've moved in with my girlfriend when I was 18. She's a bit older than me, but I didn't mind at the time. The reason I moved out of my parents' house so young is because I never had a good relationship with them and wanted to move out as soon as possible. I worked as a bartender in the Inferno nightclub. It was very exhausting, and that's the reason I wouldn't have enough energy to do anything throughout the day. That took a toll on our relationship, because I couldn't spend enough time with her, and it didn't help that she was working day shifts. We were starting to argue more and more, and one day, for technical reasons, the nightclub closed early. I got home expecting her to be asleep, but when I got home, I noticed a car in my driveway that didn't look familiar. As I unlocked the door and made my way to the bedroom, I saw my girlfriend cheating on me with another guy. My heart dropped to my stomach as I stood there not knowing how to feel. I shut the door and spent the night at a nearby motel. The next day I woke up and went to take my stuff with me. She didn't feel bad about it. She didn't say a word while I was packing my stuff. I knew I couldn't stay there long because I would only get more depressed about being alone all the time. So, I decided to contact one of my childhood friends that moved to Birmingham. He told me I could stay with him until I got my life back on track. So I quit my job I had in London and left for Birmingham. I got there, unpacked, and I started looking for a job nearby immediately. Even though I knew he wouldn't mind, because of what I've been through these couple of days, I didn't want to be a dead weight. So, I was scrolling through the different pages, and I found a forum talking about how you can find well-paying jobs on the dark web. Most of them would be illegal, but I needed something to distract me, so I decided to at least check out what jobs were there. I watched a couple of tutorials, downloaded Tor, and before I knew it, I was in there, looking for a job. I went past the usual hitman, arms dealer, drug dealer nonsense, not because it was immoral, just because it was too much exposure and too easy to get caught. That is until I came across one that read, "Looking for a partner to help me make bodies disappear. Money is good, minimal risk." I thought. Intriguing. I decided to click on it to read more details, and I started liking it more and more. Now, I know that the dark web is not the safest place to find work, but I was desperate, and I got denied from every application I sent that far. I was starting to lose hope. There was a phone number left in the bottom of the page, which I assume was either a burner phone number or set up by the police. I decided to look at it and decide when I woke up the next day. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, I was feeling useless, like I'd been the whole time after the breakup. I decided to give it a try. After all, even if it was a police setup, they wouldn't have enough incriminating evidence to issue an arrest. So, I called the number, and as I expected, it went straight to voicemail. I'd lost hope again at that point. After a few hours of my silently drinking coffee and beating myself up over the breakup, my phone rang. I immediately picked up, and there was a guy on the other side that introduced himself as the partner. He told me how much he was actually paying, and he told me the address where to go and if I'm interested. "See you soon," were his last words before he hung up. I decided that I would go there. I didn't have much on worth robbing, and death didn't seem like the worst option at this point in my life. So, I risked it, and went to the address that he provided by calling a taxi. When I got there, I didn't see anything. No buildings or nothing. It was a dead end in the road. As I was about to call again, I got a call from a different number. I picked up and it was him. Go into the forest on your right and follow the red handkerchiefs that are on top of the trees, he said, and hung up before I could answer any questions. I told the taxi driver he can go back and watched him leave before I continued doing anything. I turned to my right and looked up. There was indeed a trail of red handkerchiefs put on every second or third tree, leading deeper into the woods. I followed them, and after walking for about 20 minutes, I came across a clearing. There was a building in the middle of it, and it looked like a warehouse. As I approached, a man dressed casually, like most people do, waved me over to him. I went over to him, and he put his hand out for a handshake. We shaked hands as he introduced himself. As you probably already assumed, I'm the guy who posted the ad. You can call me T, he said, grinning. Oh, hey man, my name is He cut me off before I could finish. Keep that to yourself. I don't use names. I'll call you D, he said as I nodded my head, feeling slightly stupid about being so willing to share my name with him. Come with me. I've waited for you to come so I could show you what we'd be doing, he said, turning around and moving back to the warehouse. When he opened the door, I expected the metallic smell of blood to fill my nostrils, but instead it just smelt of chemicals, really strong chemicals. This is our specimen here, he said, moving towards a body in a bathtub. I didn't even flinch or make a face when I saw the body, which seemed to please him. I knew what I was getting myself into and what to expect. He then got out a mix of chemicals that weren't labelled by words, just different colour bottles. He poured them in, and I could see the body start decomposing slowly. You can go practice on that one over there. That was my last partner. He didn't do his job right, he said as he pointed to the second bathtub in the room. I poured in the chemicals just like I saw him do with his specimen. We sat there watching as the bodies decomposed until the only thing left were the bones. We then pulled the drains as the mush that was once their body went down, and he started putting the bones in a barrel nearby. I helped him, and after we were done, he took the barrel outside and filled it with some sort of flammable liquid. He put a lid on it and lit a matchstick as he threw it through the hole in the barrel. I thought it would explode, but the liquid he put in seemed to burn, nothing else. We waited there for a couple of minutes, and he extinguished the fire. The bones inside were black, and he ground them up until they were just black powder. We then took the barrel to a nearby river and poured the powder out into it. I was impressed, and for all I knew, it didn't leave any traces or evidence behind. It was as if the body was never there. We went on like that for a week. I was surprised by how many clients there are. He would give them a location where to leave the body, then we would go pick it up. We got half the money up front and half the money after it was done. Honestly, it wasn't hard. It took a couple of hours per body to get rid of, and the pay was fantastic. We were getting 10 grand per body. I was starting to feel better and better mentally, even starting to enjoy it. That was until we got a body of a woman and I was putting her in the tub, getting chemicals ready like I've done so many times before. I noticed a tattoo that looked familiar. As I looked closer, I realized it said 10/01/2012. It was my ex-girlfriend's tattoo. Even though she cheated on me, I felt sick to my stomach, and I'm ashamed to admit I did my job anyways. The thing that finally pushed me to the edge was one day when we got a call that there were 2 bodies to pick up. Nothing unusual. We had multiple bodies dropped plenty of times. We went to the pickup area, and I decided to look at the bodies. I'm not sure why. Maybe because my ex got killed. Maybe something else. When I opened the bags, I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do or what to say. My partner apparently noticed my shock because he made his way towards me and asked what it was. The 2 people in the bags were my parents, bullet holes in their temple. I know I said I didn't have the best relationship with them, but they were still my parents. I still loved them. I told my partner about it, and he said it's okay if I don't want to do it. He'll take care of this order himself. I looked at him, rage building up inside me. "You're not doing that to my parents! They deserve a proper burial!" I yelled as I gritted my teeth in rage. "Look, I'm sorry about that, but I won't ruin my reputation because of your feelings," he said calmly. I took the next couple of days off. I need to find a way to escape. I need to find a way to get out of this mess I put myself into. I'd rather have my old life back. I think I have a plan. You know how that Phil Collins song is supposed to be about a man who saw someone drowning and didn't save them? I wasn't going to be that person who let someone die when I could have done something that night. I was sitting on my couch, exhaling smoke, when the feeling came to me. I went numb, and it felt like a movie was playing inside my head. I could see a man driving drunk on a highway outside my house. I could see him struggling to round the first corner you hit when you leave town. I could see him falling asleep. He wasn't going to make it much further. Bushy eyebrows, beard, just starting to grey. A face hardened by tobacco, whiskey and work. He looked like so many of the men I grew up with in rural Washington. I could even hear a static, choked Bob Seger song softly coming out over the speakers of his truck. I could see him drifting to the side of the road as he went up the long, flat, straight stretch of wet highway in front of my yard. He was going to crash and die. I could feel it in my bones. I ran out my front door and into the frigid sideways rain of a cold winter night. I could see the lights of a truck nearing on the highway. I ran out to the road and started waving at the truck as I watched it approach. I caught my breath as the truck slowed and stopped next to me. The man was perplexed when he saw me, standing there in the rain by the side of the road, but I could see relief in his eyes. "Let me give you a ride home," I told him. His name was Tom. His son had died a year before from drugs. He was in a dark place. I got him home, and it felt good. It happened again a few weeks later when I was sitting at home after getting dropped off by my friends after going to the bar. A few drinks deep, I was drifting around my house drunk and lonely. My mind raced to the inside of a cold, dark tool shed I'd never seen before. I saw a frail woman, probably 60. She was setting something up in the rafters of the cold, dark shed. I couldn't see exactly what it was, but I had a sinister feeling about it. My mind then took me out of the shed, pulling away as if my field of vision was a camera on a track going backwards out of the space like in a movie. In a swift flash, I was off her property and on a country road I recognized. I'd driven by this woman's house before. It was a worn-out rambler on the road behind the local grange. I could be there in less than 10 minutes. I got there in maybe 4 minutes, racing up the wet road. I rushed into the woman's shed and found her standing on a stool, the noose in her hand. Her name was Linda. She was a widow who never had children. We talked. She promised me she wouldn't think about doing what she was going to do again. She wasn't actually going to do it anyways. I didn't believe her. You're probably wondering where this newfound condition came to me from. It was a simple answer to me. I'd just moved into a new rental house, and on the end of the property was a cemetery. I swear it even had an underground power line that ran through it. I felt I had some odd new energy coursing through me ever since I moved in there. The premonitions felt like a dreadful curse at first. I would start to get a nauseous feeling in my stomach wherever they would come. I tried to fight them. Then I realized I could kind of become a real-life small-town superhero, and I started to embrace them. I would sit at home, waiting for something to come to me, hoping I would get to help someone that night. I saved a child from drowning. I put out a house fire before the sleeping family even knew the stove was about to burn down their home. I found a young boy who was lost in the woods and going to freeze to death. A few of the stories of my heroism ended up getting back to the TV stations down in Seattle, and it was eventually connected that some 41-year-old single guy who worked at a chain hardware store had saved multiple people in separate incidents. The TV reporters were dogged. They stayed on me until I caved and allowed one of them to do some kind of puff piece about me being a guardian angel. I did an interview high as anything, but whatever they aired, it paid me $200. I knew I shouldn't have done it. She came to my door that night, around midnight. The ringing of the doorbell woke me up. I grabbed the flashlight taser I kept by my bed and crept to the front door. I tucked the taser light away once I saw her standing there on the dark front porch, her long black hair half in her pale face. Her body was thin and lithe, cased in a long black dress. She appeared harmless. I opened the door and she just stared at me for a few seconds, like she was trying to confirm who I was by studying my face. Silent all the while. "Can I help you?" I asked. She walked away without saying a word. I was so stunned I didn't get a word out until she was almost in her car. She just ignored my plea for her to come back and drove away into the night. The visit told me to stop what I was doing, stop helping, don't respond to those visions. The next night I was presented with the vision of a middle-aged man, wedding ring, the kind of guy who looked like a dad. He got hit by an unexpected snowstorm while hiking in the mountains and was lost. What he didn't know was he was just 20 yards away from the parking lot and the safety of his truck, but he couldn't see it through the snow and he was too tired and cold to make it at this point. I could be up at the parking lot in less than 30 minutes. I could save him. But I wouldn't. Something told me not to do it. Just as something was sending these messages to be the hero, something was now creeping into the back of my head, telling me it would not end well for me, and not because of the snow. I had to stop interfering. I took down a few drinks, hoping getting drunk might block out the messages of this poor man's fading fate. It didn't work. I kept getting visions of the man lost up in the snow. He was now struggling to move. He wasn't going to be able to keep it going much longer, unless I went up there and helped him. I couldn't watch a man die in the movie theater in my head. I jumped in my truck and drove up into the mountains. The snow was falling hard when I got to the parking lot. I had visions the entire way of where the man was. I knew he wasn't far from the lot and was now crawling through the snow, wasting away in the last few minutes of his life. I trudged through the snow in the direction where I was sure he was. I came across someone dressed in all black first. They were standing over something on the ground, nearly buried in the snow. It was the woman who showed up on my doorstep that night. She crouched down and held on to whatever was on the ground below her. I held myself there and watched what she was doing. Her hand was on the chest of the man on the ground. Visions flashed into me. I was in the POV of the man on the ground in the snow, looking upward at the face of the woman in black. Her pupils wide and black, her skin ashen white, and her hand strong on my chest, feeling like it was pushing me down into the ground. She was taking away the man's life at that very moment. I could feel the man go still. Then the woman in black turned around to me. I started to backpedal towards my truck. She didn't say anything, just moved quickly towards me. I could feel a powerful anger rushing at me. It seeped into my muscles and made movement difficult. I was suddenly slow in my retreat back to my truck. She was not slow. She moved swiftly to me and soon was almost within arm's reach of me. My vision started to move away from the dead dad over in the snow and to myself. I could now see myself lying on the ground next to my truck, with the woman in black on top of me, her hand pushed hard on my chest, draining the life out of me. I think she was sending me a warning more than anything, though. I didn't think she actually wanted to kill me. It was like she was telepathically telling me it wasn't my time. She played by the rules, but she was willing to bend them if I didn't stop. I would have to stop. I opened my mouth and told her that. She seemed to accept it. She walked away into the endless white of the snow, and I got in my truck and drove back home. Now I'm cursed. I sit at home every night knowing who is going to die in my vicinity and how they're going to die, and knowing I could do something about it, but won't. I drink more than I used to, and sometimes when I've had too much, which is almost every night, I think about getting into my truck and going to save someone for whom I am their only hope of survival. Maybe I will someday. It happened when the storm hit and the house went dark. I'd started renting my first home recently from my great aunt. She had reached a point where she was having mobility issues and a walker wouldn't easily fit down the narrow hallway between the rest of the house and the bedrooms and bathroom anymore. I had my first steady job and figured this way I could get my own place, but also help out my auntie with some of the exorbitant costs of her new assisted living place. The nostalgia and happy memories certainly didn't hurt either. When I was a kid, I had loved it here. The big windows in the living room and kitchen filled the place with light and provided a beautiful view of the trees in her backyard. The only thing that is odd about it is how thin the hallway is that leads from the living room to the bedrooms and office, and it's so dark. There are no windows, and even during the brightest part of the day when the conjoining rooms have sunlight streaming through the window, that hallway is dark. I'm not sure how they managed to achieve that level of darkness when building the place. It was almost impressive. At night, it's almost pitch black. It used to scare me when I was younger, so my mum and my aunt threw a couple of night lights in the outlet, and I've just continued the tradition. I was loving the new place, even planning to see if my girlfriend Gwen wanted to move in with me. We'd been dating for about 2 years, but I think I was delaying asking her because I was terrified she'd say no. And then what? Now, I regret never asking her. I wish she was here with me last night. I'm not sure if the storm was the cause or it was coincidental. I've always loved thunderstorms, which works out well since I live in Tornado Alley. Last night, the rain was coming down almost sideways outside. The thunder was loud and the lightning striking in intense flashes. It wasn't my first storm in the house, and at first I was loving it. I had my cozy blanket, was watching true crime on TV. I could hear the thunder. I could see the rain illuminated in the weak moonlight from my sofa. The power went out, which isn't unusual. I switched to watching on my phone. My battery didn't typically last that particularly long, but I had my power bank nearby. I wasn't too worried since the power is usually back on pretty quickly. Eventually, I got up to go to bed. I rounded the corner and froze at the entrance of the hallway. I had never seen darkness like that in my life. It was almost claustrophobic in how it sectioned off the house in two, the living room and the kitchen, illuminated by some moonlight, and then the hallway and the rooms beyond, which were just black. I couldn't see beyond the entrance to the hall, where moonlight still filtered in through the living room windows. I was seriously debating if I should just sleep on the sofa. I'm in my 20s, but my overactive imagination means the dark still freaks me out. My steady diet of true crime and horror podcasts right before bed probably didn't help. When I heard something that sounded like breathing in the hallway, just past where the blackness began. My first thought was to bolt out the front door, rain be damned, but decided it was my imagination. As a compromise, the sofa sounded great. I had been tossing and turning for about an hour and finally started to drift off when the sound began. It was like a distant wail. I shuddered, sat up quickly. As I began to awaken fully, I realized I was hearing the tornado sirens for a neighboring county, because I'm right on the border. Theirs somehow sound even more eerie than ours do, almost otherworldly. I'm not sure why. Maybe they've found that creepier sounding sirens get people moving faster. I grabbed my glasses, rubbed my eyes, smudging what was left of my mascara, and looked at my phone. We were under tornado watch still here, but if the sirens were going off 5 miles from me, I was sure we were about to have ours go off too. My living room and kitchen, with all the wonderful windows, were now the most dangerous places in the house. We don't have basements here due to something about too much clay in the soil, so my best bet was the bathtub in the master bath, on the other side of the hallway. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and stood at the entrance. I had such a bad feeling that I couldn't describe. I froze. Maybe I should just wait. My phone buzzed. Tornado warning. Seek shelter immediately. My weather app helpfully told me. Almost on cue, our sirens started going off. The two sirens, with their differing timings and sounds, were creating a creepy melody in the distance. I told myself it was fine, that whatever sort of things I could imagine lurking in the dark in the short 10-foot hallway were not real. Tornadoes were very real, and we'd had some bad ones in the past few years. My phone buzzed again. Gwen had texted me. "Sirens here. You? Did you lose power?" "Yeah, head into the bathroom for shelter," I texted quickly. "Do you have somewhere safe in your apartment?" She was on the 5th floor, lots of glass and windows. I felt my stomach drop at the realization. I wished she was here with me. "Yeah, stairway is a designated shelter. Stay safe, Jane. Love you." I sighed relief. "Love you too. Please stay safe. Keep me posted." Something hit the window in the living room, and I audibly yelped. More hit the window like hard pellets. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was just hail. I tried to switch on my flashlight, but the batteries were dead, of course. But then I remembered I had my phone with me. I shined the phone's flashlight down the hallway, and I thought I saw something move. My heart was pounding. I felt frozen in place. I tried to encourage myself to move forward, picturing a tornado hitting the house and how I promised Gwen I'd be safe. I decided I might as well just sprint a few feet to the bedroom where there was windows and would be some sort of light. And I could get my bearings, lock the door behind me and head to the tub and throw the mattress over it. I ran, sliding on the smooth floor in my slippers, but reached the bedroom without incident. The thing is though, when I got to the bedroom there was no light whatsoever. I pointed my phone's flashlight around the room and there was no window at all. The wall where the window was supposed to be was just a blank wall. It took me a moment, but I then noticed the complete silence. The sirens had both ceased, along with the rain, thunder, and hail. It all felt so wrong. The air had this stale, stagnant feel to it. It tasted almost sour on my tongue when I opened my mouth to take a breath. When I brought my phone screen back to my face, I noticed I had no reception. No data either. My last text to Gwen hadn't gone through. I pointed my phone flashlight around to the rest of the room. Other than the missing window, it looked mostly like my room, but a few things were different. It may have been the weird lighting, but the colours seemed a bit off, like someone had turned the colour saturation down. Everything seemed a bit further away, warped. My phone battery was dying. I had left the power bank in the living room. I heard what sounded like ragged breathing. It was coming from between me and the door. I flashed the phone light towards the door. Something flitted just out of my view. My phone chose that moment to die. The floorboard in front of me creaked in the blackness. I dodged around where the sound appeared to be coming from, my right shoulder slamming into something. I staggered back a foot, but I ran. The hallway is only a few feet long in reality, but it felt like it kept stretching on forever. I skidded on the floor in my slippers again, but this time tripped, landed on my stomach, which knocked the wind out of me. I crawled, so close to the part of the hallway that was illuminated by the moonlight. I felt something sharp snag my ankle, but I was able to make it to my feet and run the last few feet. My slipper was gone, my ankle stinging and a bit cut up, but I made it. As soon as I made it to the pale light, sound returned. The sirens were still going, the storm as well. It was only a short run in reality, but fear coupled with the brief exertion left me panting. I was pressed against the wall at the slightly lit end, too scared to move, expecting whatever it was to come the rest of the way and grab me and drag me into the darkness forever. But it never did. I could hear it though. I could hear it, inches from where the weak moonlight ended and the darkness began. I was still hesitant to round the hallway and turn my back on the darkness. I inched sideways and then walked backwards, keeping the hallway in my line of sight. I grabbed my power bank, plugged in my phone and begged it to charge quickly, as if my life depended on it. I inched back to the hallway. I wasn't going back down, but the tornado was still a real threat, so I needed to be away from the windows. Oddly enough, the end where some light hit seemed safe. The power came back on not too long after. The night lights gently illuminated the hallway, but I flipped the lights on quickly for good measure. There was nothing there, not even my slipper. The feeling of dread dissipated slightly with the darkness. I felt braver, inched towards my bedroom. The window was back, everything looked normal again. As my phone came back to life, I had reception and data again. I went to the tub for safety, but immediately called Gwen. The phone rang twice. The call dropped. I called my mum. I couldn't reach her either. My aunt answered, but she was panicked. She said she heard what sounded like a scream and then weird, squelching sounds from the room next door. We'd later find out that no one could find any hint of the neighbour, but also no sign of a struggle. My aunt had been staring out of her window watching the storm instead of taking shelter, being the stubborn lady that she was. I'm panicking. Whatever happened in my house, I think it happened all over town. I don't think whatever it was can leave the shadows, but I think there are more of them. It's like the total darkness led to a different place. I don't know what caused it, and I'm worried it could happen again, here, anywhere. I can't stop worrying about my mum, and about Gwen. My mum isn't home, I can't reach her. A lot of my co-workers didn't show up for work. I'm beating myself up, thinking about Gwen, who'd been standing in that pitch black, dark stairwell. My first memory was in the back seat of my parents' Honda Odyssey, staring out at the rows of vibrant green trees, clashing with the greyish-blue sky as they zipped past. I think we were coming back from church, based on how everyone was dressed. My parents spoke in hushed tones in the front seat, anger in my dad's, sadness in my mum's. They would occasionally look back at me with soft smiles. My mum would reach back and hold my hand in hers. Even back then, I knew something wasn't quite right. For the next several years, I would sleep in between my parents. By the time I was 10 or 11, I felt I was too big for their bed and wanted my own room. The most I could get was a separate bed adjacent to my parents'. It was only when I turned 15 when I was finally allowed to sleep in my own room. It was such a great feeling to finally have the office room in my house converted into my bedroom. Finally, 2 doors between myself and my dad's elephant-like snoring. I got all my clothes, makeup, magazines and books from the loft and began to decorate my own room. In the corner of the room, I saw a newly installed black video camera with a blinking red light. I sprinted to the living room to ask what it was for. He pressed the button on the remote and the football game was replaced by a black screen. Grace, don't worry about it. They're just there to keep you safe. Safe from what, Dad? I asked, forehead furrowed. We live in a good neighbourhood. You already have a ton of cameras around the house. Why my room too? He sat up on the brown leather sofa, and his eyes met mine with a kind but stern gaze. Trust me, I pray every day that you'll never have to find out. I stopped questioning him after that. A few weeks later, I met what Dad was protecting me from. I went to bed just like any other night, brushed my teeth, took off my makeup, and had a good night chat with my new boyfriend. After waking up to a particularly scary dream, I opened my eyes to see scattered shadows painting my room. I could see the time was 2:57 a.m. Wiping the sweat off my head, I began to turn over to go to bed. Before I could complete the motion, I saw something near my doorway, a shadow. I froze, hoping it hadn't noticed I could see it. The shape was obviously female, but it was far too short to be either of my parents. I was too scared to say or do anything, so I waited. I laid there with my eyes squinted, doing my best impression of someone fast asleep. I almost screamed for my parents, but having just gotten my new room, I decided against it. Eventually, I fell asleep. Several months passed again with no incident. I chalked it up to a bad dream and quickly forgot about it. In that time, I began to lose a lot of weight for some reason. It got to the point where many of my clothes stopped fitting. My mum finally stopped me one day, after school. "Hey, Grace, You look very tired these days. Have you been eating enough? Is everything okay at school? Yeah, Mum, I've been eating. Everything's good, I replied impatiently. She paused for a second after that, looking at me with a sad expression. You know we can talk about anything, right? I paused as well, thinking about my frightening experience with the shadow in my room. I decided it was not worth bothering them about. Yeah, I know, Mum. I'll let you know if I need to talk, I said quickly as I grabbed a snack from the fridge and went up to my room. As I got upstairs and started eating my yogurt and peanut butter crackers, I noticed something in the wood floor by my doorway. 2 sets of 3 deep scratches. Propelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I immediately jumped from my desk and went to go check them out. They looked to be spaced apart as if some type of mountain lion had stood there on its hind legs. The only difference, the claw marks were deeper than any animal I had ever seen. Each mark had to be as deep as the first segment of my index finger. Hey Mum, could you come take a look at this? I called. I looked up as my mum arrived, but by the time we both looked back down, they weren't there. The only marks we saw were some tiny scratches, not uncommon for how old the wood floors were in my house. My mum still looked concerned. Grace, are you sure you're okay? I think we should move you back into our room. You can keep your room just how it is and come here whenever you want. After spending far too much time pleading with both my mum and, when he got home, my dad, they finally agreed to let me keep my room for the time being. Though I was relieved to keep my freedom, I couldn't shake how real and terrifying those claw marks looked. 2 nights after that, I found out who the shadow had belonged to. I had an uneasy feeling in my stomach that night. I found it extremely difficult to get to bed, with thoughts of those claw marks and what they might have belonged to swirling around in my head. After at least 3 hours of attempting to fall asleep, I'd finally begun to doze off. Just before I could, she appeared in front of my eyes, this time much closer. She looked down at me with a blank expression on her youthful face. The face looked like a human's, except far too perfect. A perfectly symmetrical face, porcelain skin with not one blemish on it, long black hair draped on either side of her head. Her eyes glowed a shade of beautiful cerulean. I was locked in her gaze for what felt like hours, again too terrified to move. This time, there was no hiding the fact that I was awake and could see her watching me. Looking down her frame, draped in a white nightgown, I saw what made the claw marks from earlier. Her feet resembled human feet, except for only having 3 toes. Sticking from each toe were massive claws. The same claws protruded from each finger of her hands as well. Her stance resembled the goat. Heels in the air and all of her weight balanced on the toes. Her perfect face broke into a grin, or what was an approximation of one. The smile was just as pristine as the rest of her, producing an uncanny doe-like visage. She slowly reached a pale hand up towards me and lightly stroked my face with just enough force that I could feel how sharp the claws were. The sensation broke me out of my frozen stupor. I screamed as loud as I could, practically tearing my vocal cords in the process. Just a second after, my dad burst into the room in his underwear. His disheveled hair scattered in all directions. He turned on the lights with one hand and held a large white cross in the other. The entity slowly turned to face him, tearing the floor panels in the process. "Get away from my daughter!" he screamed in a booming voice as he held the cross and walked towards her. I imagined how terrified my dad must have been as she began to walk towards him as well. I saw her arm reach towards him, but before she could make contact, he pressed the cross towards her and began to pray. Finally, "Be strong in the Lord, and in the strength of his might, put the whole armor of God, that you will be able to stand against the schemes of the devil," he began to shout. My mum had arrived by this point and was placing her hands on him in support. The creature screamed as steam erupted from her head. "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of the ever-present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil." In a flash of steam and light, she vanished, leaving behind a putrid smell of rot. "Sharon, get the sage!" my dad yelled frantically as he ran over to me to make sure I was okay. "I'm fine, Dad," I managed to muster. "She only touched my face." Colour drained from his face after that. "Come on, Grace, let's get up." After that incident, I had no objection over staying in my parents' room for the rest of my life. "Guys, get your shoes. Let's go on a drive to clear our heads," my dad said quickly as he grabbed several things from his closet. Holy water, crosses, more sage, a few Bibles. We got out the house as fast as we could and jumped into the car. I shivered violently, looking at the bright square of my bedroom window as the car peeled out of the driveway. We were on the freeway before anyone said anything. "Guys, what was that?" I asked in a quiet, defeated voice. My mum was the first to speak. After seeing a quick nod from my dad, she said, "Grace, I think it's time we told you. We were told you were cursed when you were a baby. The moment we first brought you to church, the pastor would not even allow you to be baptized. He said that something malevolent is haunting you and will eventually take you away." She began to cry and held my hand. "We tried to protect you for a long time. That's why we kept you as close as possible. We didn't want to give it a chance to take you. The only advice the pastor gave us was to guard you at all times. She can only get you if you are alone." I began to cry too. I'd noticed my hands in her grasp were even more frail than before. My face in the rearview mirror was bony and my eyes sunken. My dad continued, "We're going to protect you, okay? We'll stick together so she can never attack you again. If you ever feel scared, I'll teach you the same prayer I used to get rid of her this time." His voice seemed less confident than his words. I nodded, blinking away my tears. Despite the fact that the incident had nothing to do with our house, we decided a change of scenery would help calm everyone's nerves. My parents took time off work so we could go on a small family vacation. It was difficult to get our minds off the demon, but eventually we were able to. In fact, it was almost fun. We got a hotel near a beach in a nearby city. Just like old times, we shared a king-size bed, and I slept between them. Instead of feeling smothered like I used to, I now felt protected. I constantly reminded myself that she couldn't get me if they kept guard. That changed last night. It was a few nights into our vacation and we had gotten ready for bed. It was just 15 minutes or so after my parents had slept. I was beginning to fall asleep as well. I blinked as my eyes grew heavy. I felt an intense sensation of falling and jolted awake to see her right above me on the ceiling. The claws on her hands and feet were firmly planted in the ceiling, but she still faced me with her head tilted in the most unnatural angle. Her long hair fell over her head, but I could still see that perfect doll face peering at me with unblinking eyes. This time, I wasn't able to move an inch. I tried with all my effort to shake my body awake, but there was no chance. I was completely locked in this staring contest with the demon. I felt for the ability to move my face muscles to scream for help, but found I could barely move my lips. I was not able to scream or even talk, but I found all my strength to move my lips in a whisper. "Be strong in the Lord, and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand." I stopped my prayer in horror as I noticed the glee on her face. Her mouth was moving to mimic the exact words coming out of my mouth, to the letter. By this time, both my parents had woken up and realized something was wrong. My dad had already pulled both his holy water and cross out and began to recite the same prayer as his wide eyes were locked on the demon. My mother grabbed me and we fled to the other corner of the room, clutching some holy water as well. Finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. As he held up the cross and said the prayers, she leapt from the ceiling, about 4 feet away from my dad. Her head was cocked to the side, in what almost seemed like amusement. As she heard the last word of the prayer, she responded, "That won't work on me anymore. I'm too powerful now." She walked towards my dad as he held out the cross again. She laughed again as she pressed her own forehead to it. Nothing happened. "That won't work either," she said with a sinister smile, as my dad splashed all the holy water on her. She let out a horrible witch-like cackle, and then before my dad could react, lurched forward and grabbed his throat, pressing him against the wall. "Grace! Sharon! Run!" he gasped as her grip tightened. "I almost have all her soul now. If you let me finish the job, I'll let you live. She won't survive either way." "I'll never let you take her," he spat. My dad fought until the end. He groaned and tried to punch and claw back. I'll never forget his last cries as my mum and I crawled out the window and ran as fast as we could to the car. It's been nearly 2 days of non-stop driving. We've been frantically searching for clues as to what this thing is and how to stop it. Does anyone know what this creature might be? I need to find out before it's too late. Even as I look into my car's mirror right now, I can see my face slowly change. My cheekbones are getting more and more prominent. I'm slowly losing strength. I don't have much time left. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to support this channel, we have a link in the description for that. Don't forget to give a subscribe, a like, and press the bell to get notifications. Tell us your thoughts in the comments section. You can also send us your real or fictional horror stories. The trouble started a week ago when I started playing around with one of those AI image generators that have been floating around on the internet. Normally, I would stay away from such things because I have a deep resentment towards anything to do with AI or deepfakes and the like. I find it all repulsive. Once while scrolling through Instagram, I saw a Tom Cruise impressionist who'd put a deep fake of the actor's face onto his own. It was startling and disturbing. It wasn't how much he looked like the real Tom Cruise that bothered me. It was how much he didn't look like the real thing. He looked like some thing wearing another man's face. But people in the comments section were eating it up, and some even believed it was Tom Cruise. A lot of them believed it. Couldn't they see how fake it all was? And how wrong it was for that impressionist to put another person's face over his own? I can't help but think that something bad is going to come from this one day for our society. Not that it matters much for me. I'm probably going to be dead soon. No, not probably. I'm sure of it. I can hear him outside, even as I type this. The AI image generator hooked me. It was simple. You give it a prompt and it will produce an image of that prompt. I'd seen similar AI generators in the past, but what astounded me about this one is how specific the prompt could be. How the AI could produce almost anything you thought of in great detail. The images I saw floating online made me laugh, so I decided to bite the bullet. Sure, the Tom Cruise thing was creepy, as was the potential for that kind of technology in the wrong hands, but this was harmless fun, right? Not even remotely the same sort of thing. A stupid generator making stupid images for you. When I brought up the site, I sat long and hard thinking about the first prompt I wanted to give the generator. Then I remembered a story my father once told me about when he was in college and he visited Karachi, Pakistan with his world studies class. He told me that one night when he and his classmates were walking around the city, they came across a man who was playing chess with a dog. Not pretending to play, but really playing with him. And my father told me that when we walked past the man again an hour later, that the man was shaking his head, that he looked beyond frustrated, defeated. But the dog looked happy, grinning even. The dog had apparently won. I typed "dog playing chess" into the generator and hit enter. It started loading, and after a few minutes the generator produced an image. It was an image of a dog playing chess. It even had a stupid smile on its face. I laughed. A stupid generator making stupid images. I told myself I would only spend a few more minutes playing, but those minutes quickly turned into an hour, and when I next looked at the clock, I realised I'd spent almost 2.5 hours playing around with the generator. I won't waste your time by showing you all the images I created. They are as banal and dumb as you'd expect. I was about to close the tab when another prompt came into my head. If I told you this prompt came out of nowhere, that would be a lie. I know exactly where it came from. It came from the fact that about 3 months ago, one of my co-workers had died. His name was Jeremy. He was a good guy and had even managed to get promoted in my office, despite only working there for a couple of months at that point. Jeremy was what you call a real go-getter. The kind of guy who gave it 110% at all phases in his life. He had big aspirations to go along with the big cup of coffee he drank every morning. A cup that had "World's Best Jeremy" written on it. And all that was wiped out when he forgot to look both ways when crossing the road. He got taken out by a semi-truck. Jeremy's death struck me hard, not just because it was the death of a fellow co-worker, but because it made me realise how fragile life is. If a guy like Jeremy could get taken out, what did that mean for someone like me? How much borrowed time was a schmuck like me really on? If Jeremy had only looked both ways. Or if he had somehow known what was going to happen before it happened. I typed, "How am I going to die?" into the generator and hit enter. The generator started loading, and kept loading, and loading. It was a very long time, much longer than all the other prompts. I began to feel foolish, thinking I'd finally managed to give it a broken prompt. I mean, of course I did. It had been a profoundly stupid prompt. There was no way the generator could know how. It produced an image. It was an image of an old man in a yellow hat. I laughed when I saw it, though it wasn't the same kind of laugh that the other generated images had gotten out of me. It was nervous laughter. Scared laughter. Maybe you laughed too when you looked at the image, right? Be honest. It's okay. It's just a stupid generator producing stupid images after all. Right? Still, the image did bother me. The old man's frown, those sunken eyes, and that pale complexion. In the back of my head, I thought of that creepy Tom Cruise deepfake, how the comments were convinced of its legitimacy. I decided I'd had enough and closed the tab. My prompt had simply confused the generator and it had produced a random incoherent image. That's all. It had been stupid for me to even ask the damn question in the first place. What had I expected? An actual answer? Obviously, an AI generator had no idea how I was going to die. I saw the old man the very next day. This was 6 days ago. I'd been running errands downtown and had quickly forgotten about the image from the night before. It had faded away from my memory like a bad dream. It was an overcast day and it looked like a really big storm was coming. I could see huge purple clouds in the distance. As I was walking to my car, I got this uncomfortable feeling that someone was watching me. When I looked back, I saw the old man in the yellow hat. It was unmistakably him. He had the same bright yellow hat, the same deep frown, the pale skin, and those horrible sunken eyes. He was across the street and he was staring at me. No, that's not it. He was glaring at me. I mean, really glaring at me. And his hands were opening and closing in a slow, violent motion. He began to walk towards me. He walked in a strange manner, like someone who had never walked before and was only just learning how. Like something that was only pretending to be human. Pretending to wear an old man's face. And I spotted a funny thing. No one else seemed to notice him. People walked past him without giving him a second glance. As he crossed the road, I thought for sure he was going to get hit by a car, but he weaved through the traffic like some grotesque version of Frogger, and no driver paid him any mind. Not even a single honk. Morbidly, I thought of Jeremy getting hit by that semi. There was one other person that noticed him. It was a little girl who looked right at the old man and then began crying. The little girl's mum looked up to see if she could spot what had caused her daughter to become so distraught, but not once did her eyes land on the old man. He walked past her like a ghost. and as he got closer to me, the deep frown began to turn upwards into a horrible grin. I dropped my groceries, got in my car and drove straight home. On the way, I told myself I'd only been seeing things. Had to have been seeing things. When I got home, I immediately locked all the doors and bolted to my room. I brought up the AI generator and again asked it, how am I going to die? I needed the generator to produce a new image. I needed it to show me that the image of the old man had just been a random image it had conjured, and that now it would do that again. It would create something completely random because it didn't understand my question. Couldn't have possibly understood my question. Couldn't have possibly shown me anything real, and certainly wouldn't have shown me how I was going to die. It produced the same image of the old man. I asked it again. Same image. I asked it about 50 more times, and every time it was the same image of the old man in the yellow hat. Stupid generator making stupid images, right? Only that thing that had been walking towards me hadn't been stupid. That thing looked very real and very terrifying. I haven't left my house since that day. 2 nights ago, I saw an old man outside my bedroom window, glaring at me. Last night, I heard him try the front door, then walk around and try the back door. Today, I brought up the generator and typed, "How do I stop the old man in the yellow hat?" It started loading, and then immediately replied, "Too much traffic. Try again later." But I know if I try again, I'll get the same response. It's not going to tell me. I'm paralyzed by fear, paralyzed by those sunken eyes and ghostly complexion. I can hear him outside right now as I type. He's been there the entire time. He's walking around the back of the house. There. He just tried the back door again. "Why isn't the sauce thickening?" I asked, nodding to the pot of Kraft macaroni and cheese on the stove in front of me. "You mean the boxed macaroni?" my husband replied, with a hint of exhaustion in his voice. "It's powdered cheese, Jen. You shouldn't need to thicken." My cheeks flushed red with embarrassment. I'd never been a good cook. In fact, I've always been a terrible cook. Thankfully, James is a kind and patient man. He always says that he loves me more than he hates my cooking. He does his very best to hide his displeasure each time I slap a spoonful of overcooked rice or underdone pasta onto his plate, but that doesn't keep me from feeling disappointed in myself. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat across from him at the dinner table and watched solemnly as he tried to disguise the involuntary twitch of disgust on his face at that first mouthful of whatever over-seasoned disaster I'd served him that evening. This evening was no different. I begrudgingly handed James his dinner, overcooked chicken breasts and watery boxed macaroni and cheese. He accepted it without complaint and took his place at the little wooden table in the corner of our small kitchen. "Thanks for cooking, Jen," he said, smiling as he attempted with great effort to cut through his rubbery chicken breast. And I could tell he really was thankful, despite the fact that he could probably find a more enticing meal in any back alley dumpster. "Ah, al dente this evening," he quipped with a chuckle as he scooped up his second bite of macaroni. I didn't deserve his kindness in this regard, although I appreciated it. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed as I thought of ways to improve my cooking. I was becoming desperate. James has always been so supportive of me. The least I could do is learn how to cook him a meal that didn't taste like dog food. I considered, and dismissed, a variety of potential solutions. My father always joked that my mother could burn water, so it would be pointless to ask her for advice. We can't afford private cooking lessons. I've tried to watch tutorial videos online in the past, but the meal still never turned out quite the way it was supposed to. After an hour or so of exhaustive consideration, I suddenly remembered Helga, an elderly Hungarian, or maybe Russian, woman who lived across the street. She was very old and somewhat reclusive. The kids on the street avoided her. They claimed she was a witch. I always thought it was mean of them to say that about her just because she was elderly and maybe a little odd. Nonetheless, she was old enough to be someone's grandma, and grandmas know how to cook, right? Maybe she would have some old Eastern European family recipes to share with me. Satisfied with this thought, I resolved to visit her the next day and ask her for help. I awoke the next morning well after James had already left for work. He usually makes his own breakfast and packs his own lunch, which is probably for the best. I laid in bed, well past my usual wake-up time, watching the sunbeams coming through the gap in the curtain move across the floor. It wasn't laziness that kept me in bed, but nerves. For some reason, I felt intimidated by Helga, and the thought of reaching out to her for help. As mean as they may be, the neighborhood children were correct in saying that she had a rather frightening presence. Summoning my courage, I rose from the bed and set about my morning routine. Hair, makeup, a well-ironed dress. I wanted to make a good impression on Helga. Once I felt satisfied with my appearance, I walked out the front door and started down the sidewalk to her house before I could change my mind. It was a very short walk. Her house stood only 2 down from my own house, and on the other side of the street. Standing on the pavement, I noted that the paint on the exterior of her house was chipping. The lawn, if you could call it that, was either dead or dying. I'd driven past her house countless times, but never noticed that it was in a state of disarray befitting of its inhabitant. I started up the stairs on her front porch, recoiling at the abundance of cobwebs surrounding the front door. Knocking lightly on the wood, I expected to wait a moment before receiving an answer. Instead, Helga opened the door immediately, as though she'd been standing on the other side waiting for me to arrive. I'd waved at her from a distance many times and even exchanged shouted pleasantries from across the street, but I'd never stood this close to her before. She had thick, light grey hair which was gathered in a bun atop her head. Her face was framed with deep wrinkles. "Hello," I started. "My name is Jen," she finished. Yes, I'm sorry to bother you, you need assistance," she interrupted again. This startled me. I found her foretelling to be a bit unnerving, but I'd come this far already. "Yes, I'm not very good at I need assistance with cooking," I replied. "Please." I suppose she was satisfied with my stammered explanation, because she fully opened the door and waved her long, too thin arm toward the gut of her house, inviting me inside. I awkwardly shuffled past her in the doorway and headed toward the kitchen table that was visible on the other end of the hallway. I took a seat at her table, which was covered in a very intricate lace tablecloth that resembled the cobwebs on her porch. She followed me into the dimly lit kitchen and sat across from me. A moment of silence hung in the air. I began to fidget in my chair. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "you're a terrible cook?" I was taken back by her bluntness. I'd never actually said I was a terrible cook, although I suppose she lived close enough to me that she may have been able to hear the smoke detectors in my kitchen going off every other day around dinner time. I nodded in confirmation. "I want to learn how to cook a nice meal. You know, something that actually tastes good," I explained, lowering my eyes in embarrassment. "Ah, your husband is giving you grief, is he?" she asked, clearly expecting an affirmative response. "Complaining about the meals you prepare, is that it?" "No, he would never. He's so sweet and tender. I just don't want to disappoint him anymore," I clarified, surprised by the tears suddenly gathering in the corner of my eyes. Once again, I sat in a heavy silence at the kitchen table, hoping for some sort of comfort from the old woman. She hummed, seemingly indifferent to my emotional state. "Sweet and tender, you say?" "Yes," I confirmed through sniffles. She sat silently contemplating for a moment. "Fine," she finally said, rising from the table. She patted me on the back a little too hard with her bony palm in what I interpreted as a poorly executed gesture of reassurance. "I suppose I could teach you one or more practiced recipes?" "Oh, thank you. She silenced me with a wave of her palm. I watched as she opened a cabinet above the inexplicably bubbling pot on a stove and began removing items in an attempt to locate something specific. Baking soda, baking powder, pasta, cans of carrots, beets, beans and peas now sat on the counter alongside multiple canisters of herbs and spices. She continued pulling items from the cabinet until, finally, she came upon a very small jar of white powder. It could have passed for salt, but I had the funny feeling it wasn't. "Here," she said, thrusting the glass jar into my hand. "I will teach you another day. For tonight, sprinkle this in his food before you serve him. He will not be disappointed, I promise." At that, she made an X motion above her heart with a long, yellowed fingernail, and chuckled in a manner that I found somewhat unsettling. Nevertheless, I gratefully accepted the jar and attempted to ignore the creeping feeling that I may have made a mistake asking for her help. I mean, sure, she might be a bit strange, but who am I to judge a lonely old woman? I graciously excused myself from her home with a wave, promising to return another day for a cooking lesson. As soon as I stepped off her front porch onto the sidewalk, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Tension released from my shoulders as my muscles relaxed. Not only had I finally found a solution to my problem, but I'd made a new friend in the process. At least I think I made a new friend. Helga was kind of difficult to read. I thought back to our encounter, trying to decipher how she may have felt about my visit. I mean, she agreed to help me, so she mustn't be too annoyed with my intrusion. He will not be disappointed, I promise. I remembered her words and smiled at the thought of finally serving my husband a meal worth eating. Before the sun had even set, I stood by the stove fussing over a pot of boiled broccoli. My mind constantly drifted to the mysterious jar of spices nestled in the pocket of my apron. Or what I assumed to be spices anyway. Could also be rat poison for all I know, but I'm just desperate enough to trust the old woman completely. Suddenly, the timer on the oven rang out, interrupting my thoughts and causing my heart to skip a beat. I laughed at my overreaction as I opened the oven door to collect a pan of medium rare, or maybe well done, pork chops. I carefully placed the largest pork chop on a dinner plate beside a generous pile of pale green broccoli. As usual, it didn't really look appealing. I gingerly sprinkled a meager amount of white powder from the small glass jar over the broccoli on my husband's plate. Glancing again at the sad assemblage in front of me, I decided it might be best to just add it all. I dumped the entire contents of the jar onto the plate and mixed it in with the broccoli until it was no longer visible. That should do it. "James!" I called into the living room where my husband was watching old reruns of some corny science fiction show from the 70s. "Dinner is ready." I already had both plates ready and waiting on the table by the time he ambled into the kitchen. I sat in front of my own pork chop and tried my best to suppress my excitement as he took his place from across me. "How does it look?" I asked. "It looks like broccoli," he joked in response. He scanned the plate again before picking up his fork and stabbing a soggy stalk of broccoli. I scooted forward in my seat, eager to witness his reaction to the new ingredient. I could feel myself holding my breath as he chewed his first bite. He swallowed and paused, looking a bit surprised. "Wow, Jen, how did you make this broccoli? Did you find a recipe online? It's delicious." Delicious. The word reverberated through my head like a song. Happiness radiated through my body, sending a warm feeling through my stomach. I wanted to jump from the table and dance through the kitchen. Instead, I concealed my overwhelming excitement and acted as normally as I could possibly manage. I watched gleefully as James continued shoveling stalks of broccoli and bits of pork chop into his mouth. "Oh, thank you, James. My words caught in my throat as I noticed his hair was steadily beginning to change colour. His thick, light brown hair was suddenly turning white, starting at the roots and moving quickly towards his scalp. I sat, mouth agape, staring at his head, which was now entirely covered in nearly translucent white hair. "You actually what, Jen?" James prodded, entirely unaware that his appearance had just drastically changed in a matter of seconds. "Your hair," I replied, ignoring his original question. "What? Is it messy?" he asked, attempting to smooth down the stray locks with his fluffy white fingers. No, it's not messy, it's... Oh my God, James!" I yelled, interrupted once again by a sudden change in appearance. He didn't seem to notice that he was sprouting 10 long, wiry whiskers, 5 on each furry cheek. My heart started to pound in my chest. The beating rang in my ears like a gong. I stood quickly from the table, bracing with a hand on the back of the wooden chair as my knees buckled beneath me. "James!" I yelled again. There was no response. He'd suddenly disappeared from my view. "James!" I squeaked, edging myself around the side of the table to the seat where he'd been visible only moments ago. Again, there was no response. I stood in front of his empty chair, gripping the lip of the table with such a force that my knuckles turned white. I hesitated for a moment before slowly pulling the blue tablecloth back. My stomach twisted into knots as the lifted tablecloth revealed a large white rabbit sitting on the floor in between the legs of the dinner table. I felt bile rise in my throat. I collapsed onto the floor beside the rabbit, suppressing the urge to vomit. Hot tears streamed down my face as I stared at this unexpected creature. He stared back with empty black eyes. His cheeks twitched beneath his small pink nose as he investigated his surroundings, sniffing a small piece of broccoli that had fallen to the floor in the commotion. If I didn't know for certain that this rabbit had been my husband only moments ago, I really would have found him quite cute and exceedingly ordinary. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed, pulling the rabbit into my lap. "I'm so sorry," I repeated again and again while patting the rabbit, my husband, on his soft furry head. I continued sobbing, wailing really, on the kitchen floor for what seemed like hours, but couldn't have been more than 30 or 40 minutes. After a while, I managed to calm myself down enough that the tears stopped flowing. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths and sat numbly watching my husband hop around the kitchen floor on his disproportionately large back feet. Hearing him thump, thump, thump about the towel was starting to make me nauseous. Again, I felt the urge to vomit. My thoughts spun in circles as I desperately tried to come up with some solution to get us out of the mess, to get my sweet, loving, normal, human husband back. My mind immediately turned to Helga. That wicked, vile, evil woman. That witch. She did this to him. I don't know why, I definitely don't know how, but I know that she did. Anger bubbled up inside me. I felt my face grow hot and my stomach boil with rage. I grabbed James off the floor and held his small body against my chest as I marched out the front door to face the old woman again. My heart began to race as I stepped onto her dreary-looking porch. It somehow looked even less inviting after the sun went down. I raised my shaking fist to knock on the front door when it suddenly opened before I could complete the task. "Ah, back so soon?" the woman asked in a cheery, condescending tone. The sly smile on her face confirmed my suspicion that she was to blame for this. Not that I really had any doubts before. I wordlessly motioned to the rabbit nestled in the crook of my elbow, afraid I might start sobbing again if I opened my mouth to speak. I tried to look tough, although I'm sure she could tell I was only seconds away from melting into a puddle on her doorstep. "What?" she asked, feigning ignorance, as if this was all one big game to her. "You asked me to teach you how to make a tasty meal, didn't you?" I nodded, tightening my arms around James and pulling him closer to my rapidly beating heart. "Well, rabbit stew is my favourite." This allegedly true horror story was sent to us by Reddit user Lady Larking. Enjoy. I grew up outside of a relatively small town in Texas, and more importantly, in a haunted house. Well, to be more accurate, on haunted land, and I'd like to tell a few stories as well as my own experiences. Now, a little background which gives some context to why I say land instead of just house. My childhood home sat about 100 yards, or a football field, off of the Colorado River, on about 100 acres of land technically owned by the city. It's a public city park that lays outside the boundaries of the city. Yeah, it's that kind of arse-backwards place, notwithstanding all the other political rubbish you'd expect out of a small southern town. Anyway, back to the actual important information. My father is the live-in park ranger for this city. It's not a bad gig, all things considered, though, in my opinion, he could be paid more for being maintenance and authority figure that's on call 24 hours a day, 365 a year. This means if someone gets locked out, if a camping site loses power, or has problems, or there is a conflict, someone is knocking at our door no matter the hour. It's always been this way, since I was about 7 years old. and I'm now 29. He's a tough old man, almost 55 years old, and not all that inclined to share spooky stories of things he's seen and been told. Though he does believe in ghosts, he'll try and find the rational explanation for why things happen before he caves and admits it was a ghost, even if me and my mother know damn well what it is. Now, I give this background because it's important to note that when things go wrong, he's usually the first person on the scene. This includes the time we had some jet skis explode while a father and daughter were riding them. They were fine, thank goodness. Or when some alligators rolled up on the campsite. Or personal disagreements, people trying to be sneaky and not pay by showing up after dark, people doing illegal substances or trying to get freaky in the back seats in the rough camping part of the park. And of course, being right on the river. Drownings. For some reason, people love to drink and swim. And someone drowns about every 3 years minimum. We're actually due for another drowning. Following the pattern, I don't hope people drown, but the memory of the last ones don't seem to stick as long as they should. Anyway, Dad is usually the first on the scene, either to try and help the people or to direct the ambulance and police and eventually search for the bodies. Most appear after a day. One took 3 days. Mum said that's the only time she's ever seen Dad truly disturbed. It's not a fun part of the job, and Dad dreads summer and spring when people start coming out and acting stupid. Please, please do not drink and swim, and if your kid isn't a strong swimmer, even if they are, please put a flotation of some kind on them if you're swimming in a river or lake, for your sake and everyone else's. So, people drown, sad as it is. That being said, these drownings have led to several spirits that hang around. Our most popular one to be reported is the first man my father helped to try and find a body for. He was wearing a white shirt, blue jeans, and was a friendly man by nature. Now, I need you to know, I have only seen him once myself after his passing. My mother and my father have both seen him multiple times, and many campers have seen him. One gentleman, who likes to fish, was out late, close to midnight, returned to his car alone as he'd been all day. He gets his gear and gets himself in, and goes to buckle up after starting his car, only to see the smiling figure of a man in the white shirt and jeans in the passenger seat. He leapt out, and when he turned around, saw no one was in his car. It's been almost 5 years, and this fisher no longer comes out by himself if he's staying after dark. Other campers have reported seeing a man sitting at a table, white shirt and jeans, who will see them and raise his hand as if to wave to them. People will go to wave back until they realise no one is there. My mother used to work early morning shifts, 3 a.m. to 2 p.m, and she'd see him standing outside the office on her way to work from time to time. My own experience with him is simple, but spooky. I was sitting in the office with a friend one night talking, about 10:30. My parents now live above the office after Hurricane Harvey. Anyway, we were sitting there, and I see out the window over my friend's shoulder a figure walk by the window, like it was going to walk through the double glass doors of the office. Now, I live in a park, meant for camping and visiting. However, it's important to note that the park was A, closed due to our sewer system getting redone, and B, it was in the middle of the week and most people don't show up then. It was the man in the white shirt and jeans, and I knew he was coming to buy something from the office. I was spooked, who wouldn't be? And my friend and I retreated upstairs rapidly. He's never been threatening, and I'm sort of glad the flood didn't take him away. However, even with him on the land, there are worse things that are here. My childhood home, which I must admit I'm sort of still grieving and grateful I cannot live in again, was destroyed by Hurricane Harvey. It had 2 feet of water in it and emotionally devastated our family. There is something that still lives in that husk now used for storage, and I hate it. Growing up, my bedroom was used during the day by myself, and never at night. When I was little, I often had night terrors that had me shrieking for my mother and sleeping on the couch instead. She told me that I often said, "She has no face," when I was asked why I was crying at night. By the time I was 9, the couch in the living room was my bed, and my bedroom just had a cheap futon. The feeling of being watched, of something standing behind you, was and is overwhelming. I hated it. Even when I slept in the living room, I had to have the door to that room shut, as well as the one next to it. The feeling of being stared at was so strong. We had a door to the garage at one end of the living room and one doorway to the kitchen. The garage door was open during the day and there was no tangible door to the kitchen. What I saw in these parts of the house I can't say were human-like, but they at least wanted to be seen as it. They felt wrong, very wrong. Have you ever seen someone walk quickly by an open door? My mother and I, and we think my father, but he'll deny it, saw these tall figures blur by, mostly dark but occasionally pale. I hate seeing them. I always had this awful sense of dread and anxiety, a fear they'd not walk by the doorway and walk into the room I was in. I think they did, more than once. I used to walk in circles in our living room while on the phone with my now platonic partner. As I'd walk by the couch, I'd feel as if something brushed against or wrapped around my ankle, and it always terrified me. I was always scared to look behind me, or under the couch, even as a grown woman of 20-something. I hated those things, those moments. They liked to touch my hair and ankles as I tried to sleep, and I'd say it might have been sleep paralysis, except it was only ever after I closed my eyes initially, and falling asleep was an hours-long trial. Mum often experienced seeing them, and hates them too. Since Dad is on call 24/7, there are times he has to go out at night, much to our anxiety. We'd often hear the front door open and shut, or hear his voice and call out to see what had happened or what was wrong. About half the time, he wasn't even home, and for a time we'd write it off as we'd just heard things, until the dogs started responding to it too. We used to have a lab mastiff mix, who would growl at any time this happened and move closer to my mum like he was defending her. I've seen things dart under curtains or beneath sinks, found drawers open and things knocked over, and things opened that had screw tops or push-in tops that no one had touched in months. One time, a mounted deer head from my grandfather came off its hook and cracked me in the head. The nail in it was unbent and undamaged, but it hurt, I assure you. Anyway, more recently, during my current visit home, Mum says that when she goes over to the house, or what used to be our house, she doesn't like going inside anymore. She says that when she takes the dogs out at night for bathroom breaks, she doesn't look in the dark windows, even if her instincts are telling her to. She's scared that if she does, something will be looking back at her, or feels like something is looking back at her when she does. I have these same feelings, and sometimes when I'm on doggy duty, the feeling that something is peeking over the 7-foot fence. This post is long, but I'd like to finish it by saying that our new home above the office is much more peaceful. Something opened the locked bathroom door the other night while I was visiting my parents, and an entire shelf popped off its rack in the cabinets a few weeks before that. Strange things still happen, but I'll be honest to say I'm glad it's nothing like the old home. These aren't the only moments I've had, which range from hearing muffled conversations for hours in the childhood home in the dead of night when everyone else was asleep, to hearing it again at my friend's house for months and months. I've also experienced things at high school where I teach, so I'm not sure if it's just me or my life, but I'll never be persuaded the supernatural isn't real. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to support this channel, we have a link in the description for that. Don't forget to give a subscribe, a like, and press the bell to get notifications. Tell us your thoughts in the comments section. You can also send us your real or fictional horror stories.